Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Be a Game Changer 2.0. This is the 7th of our series, and we are focused tonight on one of the other competencies, communication. Before we get into all of that work, though, it's important to recognize that this whole is sponsored by Technology-Enabled Learning in Ontario through the Ministry of Education, and we are grateful to them for their funding and support of this. And of course, it would not be possible without the partnership of the 9 Toronto Area Region School Boards, which would include Toronto District School Board, Toronto Catholic District School Board, Wellington Catholic District School Board, Dufferin-Peel Catholic District School Board, Halton District School Board, the Halton Catholic District School Board, Upper Grand District School Board, Peel District School Board, and the Provincial Schools Branch.
The 21st Century Competencies were published by the Ministry of Ontario and were drafted in the winter of 2016. They're available also on EduGames, on the EduGames website. The speaker series began February 16th of 2017, and it's been bi-weekly and goes until June 1st.
As we present tonight, we'd love to hear your comments, your thoughts, your resources if you have them, and share them with us through a couple of channels. One is through the YouTube channel that you're watching right now. On the right-hand side, you'll see a place there to post comments, ideas, share, ask questions. And we do have an entire team on the background represented by the boards in the slide before this who are ready to take your channels and push them through to the teams we talk about communication skills. If you're on Twitter, the hashtag for today is BEAGC, which stands for Be a Game Changer. Again, that's hashtag BEAGC. And we'll be following along and hope to hear from you.
Our journey so far has included a keynote from Sir Ken Robinson on learning to learn, critical thinking and problem solving, innovation, creativity, and entrepreneurship, global citizenship, and collaboration. And of course, all of those resources can be found in the e-community with the link that's there. That link will appear at the end of the evening as well, so don't worry if you didn't catch it here. We will also make sure it gets tweeted out and is posted in the YouTube channel. Tonight, we turn it over to Dufferin-Peel, and they're going to give us their take on communication as a global competency. Before we do get to that, though, it is important to note that there are many different approaches to representing the competencies. So what we're going to be hearing tonight is not the only way that you can be covering this competency. We would know and hope that you are embedding this already in your classrooms and in your schools. And this is simply one way that one group of teachers happens to be embedding this within the work that they're doing in our schools.
That's great. Thank you very much, Patrick. So, as Patrick had mentioned, we are at Dufferin-Peel Catholic District School Board, bringing to you today some ideas and information sharing about communication and communication skills. As you can see by the screen here, there is a number of ways that you can present communication skills, from interpersonal skills, writing skills, listening skills, verbal, nonverbal, presentation skills, and a whole plethora of ways within that to again present those communication skills. As one of the global competencies, it is important that students show proficiency in these skills for our modern learners as they move forward. Before we do jump into communication, we think it's just important to highlight that there is some similarities and some differences with communication versus collaboration. 2 weeks back, a member from our team had presented on collaboration, did a fantastic job showcasing some examples, some pedagogical strategies in order to elicit those collaboration skills in our teaching practice. But from tonight's standpoint, we are stating that there is a difference between communication and collaboration. We know that there is some overlap, but we must say that, for example, as a difference, in order to collaborate, you certainly need to communicate with other people in some way. Though just by communicating, you're not necessarily collaborating. I'm going to just give an example right now before we jump in. Taking Twitter as an example, it's often a social tool that people have said is a great collaboration tool, but there's been a few people commenting on, is it truly used for collaboration? Some people have turned it into enterprise collaboration, but it also could be looked at as just merely a communication tool where it's a broadcast mechanism, but stating your thoughts or views to a larger audience, still communicating, but through a technological kind of realm, where somebody tweets and the audience listens. Key to collaboration is not necessarily the technology that you're using, although some tools, of course, will support your efforts more than others, but it's rather its purpose. We are coming together and you're trying to achieve some kind of goal. That's collaboration. Separating from that, we're talking about communication. Okay, and it's the communication between one and the other. So before we get into this, just to give a quick definition of communication, it occurs when a sender expresses an emotion or a feeling, creates an idea, or senses the need to communicate. The communication process is triggered when the sender makes a conscious or unconscious decision to share the message with another person, the receiver. We do know that there are a plethora of definitions out there, and these skills are out there, but from our standpoint, we're going to be looking at the skill set of communication through a single source, as now presented by Nuno de Castro.
Communication supports the development of learning in all subject areas, including foundational skills in literacy and numeracy, and applied to both the face-to-face and the online world. An Ontario student can elevate their communication skills by fostering proficiency in the following areas according to these global competencies, which are based on the 21st century competencies that were published by the Ministry of Ontario. Very briefly, I'll just go over them. And so number one, communicates effectively in different contexts, in oral and written form, in French and or English, asks effective questions to inquire knowledge, communicates using a variety of media, selects appropriate digital tools according to purpose, listens to understand all points of view, gains knowledge about a variety of languages, and the last component, voices opinions and advocates for ideas. You see the link below that does take you to that. But we're going to jump into these competencies right now, or sorry, these components, and I'm going to hand it over to Aaron, who will take us into the first. Oh, I'm sorry, it'll be Heather.
Welcome, everyone. We are going to talk about communication and how we communicate effectively in different contexts in oral and written in various language. As Patrick mentioned, we are giving you just a sampling of some of the things we do, obviously. So feel free to share some of your ideas on the Twitter channel. So we're also talking about both speaking and listening skills here that provide a foundation for literacy. These skills include oral fluency, the smooth flow of speech, and the cognitive and social skills of accountable talk. Fontes and Pinnell have done over 4 decades of research that have established that oral language is a foundation of reading and writing development, especially for our intermediate students who are expanding their use of literacy as a tool for learning. Students need to develop oral fluency if they are to become proficient speakers and effective readers and writers with increasingly complex texts. Fluency refers to the ability to use language with ease, clarity, and automatically, without struggling at the level of words and sentences. Fluent language users are able to decode words and sentences quickly and accurately, to read, write, and speak with expression and ease, and to comprehend the meaning in the written and spoken language. So just as an example, we're going to highlight for you. Oh, I just went one too far. Hold on. We're going to highlight for you one of the strategies of accountable talk. So the term accountable talk refers to talk that is meaningful, respectful, and mutually beneficial to both the speaker and the listener. So when students engage in accountable talk, it allows them to focus on the topic and the purpose of the discussion, attend to the listener's needs and what others are saying, seriously respond to and build on what others have said, give evidence to support their points of view, and to help each other reach a common understanding and share responsibility for the learning of the whole group. Accountable talk stimulates higher order thinking and helps students to learn and reflect on their learning and communicate their knowledge and understanding. To promote accountable talk, teachers need to create a collaborative learning environment in which students feel confident in expressing their ideas, opinions, and knowledge. So just as a few examples of how you can encourage accountable talk in the different levels. So in the elementary classroom, it can be really helpful to provide your students with sentence starters and little cue cards to engage them in that conversation and to give them a starting point with that, to be able to engage in that accountable talk. So by providing the anchor charts and tools, you give the skills that the students can build on to be part of that meaningful conversation. Perhaps in a junior classroom, you're starting to look at the different actions and behaviors and what that looks like for accountability. So you build in those strategies of sitting face to face for quiet conversations, teaching them when they're watching a speaker and listening, how they can nod and have that nonverbal language. As you can see through the chart, leaning in, setting goals to stay on topic, asking clarifying questions. So it's not something students are going to innately do without us scaffolding that for them. And again, here's a link to another resource from Edutopia. And it's just, again, walking them through that scaffolded gradual release of modeling good conversation, bringing in physical cues, teaching them how to not have hurtful comments and to agree disagreeably, all that type of thing, using those open-ended questions, but thinking ahead of knowing, making eye contact, turn taking, all of the strategies that we need to build in for students to be able to communicate effectively. We also are talking about communication in the written language. So to develop as literate learners, students need explicit instruction in the individual components of reading, writing, oral communication, and higher order thinking. They need plenty of practice using these components. And students need to have the knowledge and skills to enable them to make decisions independently. They need to think like readers, writers, and speakers, and they need to interact with and create all types of text. So you may be familiar with the 4 types of strategies that we give students to build those. So from the Guide to Effective Instruction, we look at meaning makers, teaching students what does the text mean and how to interact and communicate with it. Code crackers, how to take that text apart and break it down using graphics and structures. We talk about text users and text analyzers. So this is the 4-piece strategy is a strategy that you can start in early primary, but carries through all the way into secondary. And the idea is that the students need to be able to do all of those simultaneously. So one doesn't stand alone or isn't more important than another one, but we teach the kids to integrate all 4 of those simultaneously when they're reading, writing, listening, and speaking. So just a couple of resources that you might find useful is the Adolescent Literacy Guide and the Guides to Effective Instruction that have really great examples of how to build communication skills in them. So definitely want to check those 2 out if you haven't before. And also just a couple of opportunities here. One is some alternatives to the Think, Pair, Share. So being able to get the kids to reiterate things that they've learned. And then some reading strategies and sentence starters to help them on. And we're going to pass the next slide back over to Andy Quechin, and he's going to continue.
Great, thank you. We're working off of one screen here, so we're playing musical chairs as we slide in and out. The second area we're going to talk about that Nino had highlighted from the book on the global competencies is asking effective questions to acquire knowledge. Now we know that asking effective questions, this isn't necessarily something that's new for teachers right back for the days in colleges of education, faculties of education. Big component about asking those effective questions to get students to brainstorm, to engage, to elevate their thinking, to reinforce concepts. And we're not necessarily talking about things like wait time and tone and things like that, but actually the questions at hand. As an example, just highlighting Bloom's taxonomy. It's been around for a long time. 1956 is when the educational psychologist, Dr. Benjamin Bloom, designed the Bloom's taxonomy in order to promote higher forms of thinking in education. And by that, we're talking about analyzing, evaluating concepts, processes, procedures, and principles, rather than just remembering those facts and that as a rote learning. as a great segue, it also lends its way to an entry point into the skill set of communication. Now, we're not really here to discuss the lower levels versus high level questioning. We're looking at communication skills and ways to ask effective questions from the teacher's standpoint to direct it toward the students to get them to enhance their communication skills, but through modeling, also teaching those students to enhance the communication skills within themselves. And they're fantastic skill sets for our students, be it going for interviews, job market. As a side note, recently talked to a friend who was in sales who said, and was skilled in the skill set of communication, and said, I never ask a closed-ended question. I says, why not? He says, it would kill the deal. And the example he gave was, would you like to buy it? The answer would be no, rather than asking an open-ended question to say, what are these features about this product that you like best? Or we ask our students to identify where they would see these open-ended questions. And I remember one student saying, talk show hosts in the evening, listening to them and knowing that they would, in their interviews, they never asked a closed-ended question, but open-ended question to keep the conversations going. So to teach our students how to have these open-ended questions for a couple of reasons. One is, as Aaron's going to be talking about in a few moments, is to gain that knowledge so that we can take a plethora of resources and bring that back to us, a bunch of knowledge, so that we can decipher the kind of information we need. But to do that, we have to ask those effective questions. We often talk about closed-ended question versus open-ended questions. And by closed-ended, we know those are very quick responses, almost like a rapid fire in the classroom. Who said this? What was this? It was very much those Google-type questions that elicit a very quick response. And they're great in times when we want to just check quickly where the check for understanding is, but it may not engage our students and have them going deeper in thought. Or open-ended questions are those questions that would ask our students to kind of explain a little bit further and to go a little bit deeper into their understanding, so we could, as educators, better assess them to know where they are with the curriculum, understand proficiencies, and also, again, just to motivate and maybe to empower our students to provide voice for them. So we do know, though, that just to give props to closed-ended questions for a moment, we know that they're not always as simple as anyone can quickly answer because of, like, say, a yes or no answer. It can be very complicated. Example, if I were to say 1 in binary equal to 1 in counting numbers. Fairly complex to answer, even though it's a yes or no question. But it's not something you'd be able to answer very quickly. Then again, if you were to ask an open-ended question, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a higher order thinking question, such as, what are you going to be buying today at the supermarket? A simple answer may require somebody to read off a list or create more than just a single word as a response. But in general, open-ended questions usually do have our students explain, go deeper in their answering, and practice those communication skills. So with the closed-ended questions, often, and I'm not saying always, we require those short answer responses such as yes and no, and align more with the lower levels of Bloom's taxonomy, whereas the higher or the open-ended questions often are lengthy responses and align with higher levels. And again, we're not here to analyze low versus high. We're here to ask effective questions in order to foster greater communication skills in our learners. When would you use closed-ended? Check for understanding, assessment for learning from a 3-part lesson. But open-ended can happen at any level in a 3-part lesson. Mine's on to really get a grasp of where the students are and their understanding or their view on a topic before we move in to the deeper part or the inquiry part, the action part of the lesson. You can also ask those questions through inquiry or problem-based learning or project-based learning or challenge-based learning to get the students to go a little bit deeper in the answer. And of course, in the 3rd part, in consolidation as a wrap-up, to bring it together as a real final check for understanding, to make sure the students are showing those curriculum expectations and digging deeper. Some of the goals you can use an open-ended for here are brainstorming ideas, problem solving, looking for information, encouraging thinking outside the box, resolving conflict, negotiating agreement, and elicit high-level thinking skills, as you can see here, such as application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. Hyperlinked by the short link on there, but this is from the Canadian Education Association. Some examples of some closed-ended: when was, who said, what did, do you. Again, simple answers. You're not going to bring out strong communication skills there. However, with the open-ended, getting the students to elaborate. Why did you do this? How do you solve this? What if there were? Or you can do some prompts such as make as many combinations of and ... or explain why you would, or tell me about. As an educator, what I would often do to get my students used to the communication skills is I would start small, whether I used a blended learning environment like D2L, Desire to Learn or Brightspace, or just as a welcome into my class, we started to dig deeper and to get them to elevate their voice. The communication skills I would use with them would not be something that would be necessarily complex in nature, but answers where they had a voice and something, no matter what they said, it was a safe environment for them to bring those answers forward and to create those discussions. Something that they could ramble on as much as they wanted, knowing that no matter what viewpoint they had, it was a safe environment in order to practice those skill sets. We provided for you here a couple of additional resources if you want to dig a little bit deeper into effective questioning. One of them is through a well-known and fantastic resource, EduGains. It's a questioning video library, and there's numerous videos in there for those visual learners out there that like to sit back and watch a video, and fantastic job. And also, the Ministry of Education also presented a resource called Asking Effective Questions. It's a PDF, and again, a fantastic explanation as to digging a little bit deeper into asking those effective questions. That said, we're going to turn over to our third component, Communicate Using a Variety of Media, by Sean McCabe, who's going to be now explaining this component of our communication skills to you.
Okay, everybody, hello, how are we doing tonight? Our next component, as Andy mentioned, is communicates using a variety of media. There are many traditional methods of communication that are still important today. We teach students how to communicate about current events in a newsletter, how to shape their ideas and arguments in an essay, and how to communicate in a formal way as in a traditional letter. Newspapers are so important that we assess our grade 10 skills in the provincial OSSLT test. Today, we can communicate using a variety of different applications that require completely different communication skill sets. Newspapers, essays, and letters are still important and used in effective communication. But in the world of our students, these emerging options are just as important as the traditional methods of communication. Now, the students shown in this photo are too young to use most of the tools shown. But that doesn't mean we don't teach the skills they will require to effectively communicate in this world. For example, condensing an idea or a concept into 140 characters is a difficult skill to master. But a grade 3 student learns how to determine what information is important, how to communicate with a target audience, how to use language effectively, how to properly construct a sentence, and when students are old enough and want to create their own Twitter account, they'll be able to communicate effectively in this environment. We may not post a class video to YouTube, but that doesn't mean we won't have our students make videos that involve storyboarding, writing, editing a script, filming, working on their effective verbal communication skills, and ensuring that they use appropriate body language in their video. So if students want to communicate using a video in the future, they will now understand how to effectively communicate. And finally, we may not be text messaging, or I hope we're not text messaging with our students, but we can still teach them about effective one-way communication and how, if it's not effective, a message could be changed and rumors could start as a result of people not being able to ask questions and then drawing their own conclusions. So when your students do text, they'll now understand how things can be misinterpreted, and they can now use text as an effective form of communication. We could go on and on, giving examples of using a photo to explain a concept without the need for words as an Instagram, or capturing a moment and engaging an audience as a means for effective communication as in Snapchat. But what it comes down to is that we need to have knowledge about a variety of different languages to communicate effectively. Each platform that we use requires the author to understand its own unique language. Think about the first time you heard a hashtag, or you heard of a hashtag. If you went on Twitter without this knowledge, you wouldn't really understand how to effectively communicate there. Now, let's look at this example here. Here, the topic of Catholic Education Week has been communicated over different web-based platforms. In a video, this topic can be detailed and elaborated on. In a website, it needs to be communicated clearly in order to catch the reader's attention. In Twitter, you can use your photo to help you communicate your message, but you only have 140 characters to get your point across. The concept may be the same, but understanding the unique language of each platform is essential to effectively communicate your ideas. And now that we understand that there are a variety of different media conduits for communication, and that each media requires its own language, we now have to choose the most effective digital tool for our task. And here's Nuno to explain that.
Thanks, Sean. So now that you know how to communicate in a variety of ways, the analogy that we thought of is the comparison of a toolbox, in that now you have all these digital tools within your toolbox, but it is extremely important to know which one to use and when. So for example, do I use a one-way or two-way conversation mode? Is it short Twitter chats or long discussions? Is it forums versus blogs? Formal language versus informal language? Do we look at body language, video versus audio versus text? There are numerous digital tools, such as Brightspace by D2L, Word, PowerPoint, YouTube, Skype, OneNote. They all help foster communication skills among students. We all know that the effective use of technology can result in increased student engagement, which leads to quality learning. The key is knowing what to use in order to facilitate that. Some points to think about when choosing the technology that might work or that is best for the application is, for example, student age or your target audience and their technological ability or their technological background. Also capturing a student's attention, or as we say, hooking them. And that's really engagement and student empowerment as well. Ensure that the technology supports the ideas you want to convey. Make sure that the technology provides meaningful experiences that reinforce the lesson also. And one that we thought of, and I think is also very important, and sometimes we forget about, is teacher comfort with that technology. They have to have a certain level of comfort with what they're using. We've put a small activity together that you can use within your classroom and you can try now as well. We're going to tweet out the link that you see there on the screen. When you see the link come up, you can click on the link, which will take you to an activity. The activity asks you to take a look at Twitter, and let's take a look at what's trending out there right now. You'll also see another link to the right that takes you to a quick list of what's trending. You're going to choose a topic and then check it out through a variety of media. It could be Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, etc. You'll then think about how the delivery of the message changed depending on the platform used and how you could create a task where students can communicate in different ways in order to increase their communication skills. Think about the benefits for students as well as what skills they would require to do this task. Now, when you're ready, feel free to share your ideas using the hashtag #BeAGC or Be a Game Changer, or use the link within the document. Please don't feel like you have to go to this right this minute and begin looking at what's trending and so on and so forth. The activity is going to be up for a while, and you can take a look at it at your leisure while you continue to listen to the rest of the presentation. So please don't feel you have to, stop the presentation and follow this link immediately. You can sort of multitask if you like and sort of listen to the presentation while looking at it at the same time at your own pace. The hope is that you'll see points from both elementary and secondary teachers within the chart or on the hashtag. It's important to listen to all these points of view, which lead us to our next component that Aaron will be discussing, which is listens to understand all points of view.
Hey everybody, welcome. So I'm going to share some of the points of view and opinions on listening to understand all points of view. So as a student, it can be really tough and trying to figure out and filter through all of the points of view, all the opinions, all the experiences that they're going through daily. Even just trying to sort through one position or one point of view can be very difficult for them, especially because it can diverge into a plethora of other opinions thanks to mass media, social media, and just even good old-fashioned conversations. So the things that they're experiencing and the things that they're hearing day in and day out can get very confusing, and it can become a very daunting process for them, especially when they have to really sort it out and think about it and try to find a way that they can express that understanding of all those ideas in beginning to shape their own opinions and their own point of views. So one of the things that we really need to do is we need to teach our students not only how to listen to somebody's point of view, especially from a digital citizenship perspective, where all points of view have value, even though at first glance or first listen, the opinion, the point of view might be something silly or foolish. There could be some value in there that listening to it and picking it apart and thinking about it in detail and at great length could lead to a more well-rounded position or point of view for that individual in the end. So they have to be able to express that knowledge, and they have to be able to express that understanding in some way, shape, or form. So as everybody has been building towards this, all of these tools kind of come out in building that understanding of taking in a point of view, actively listening to it, but most importantly, how do we think about it, and how do we come to that conclusion that what we are listening to, that we clearly understand what is being communicated to us. So to build this skill, we have to sort through it. We need something to practice with. We need something to build on those skill sets. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to introduce you to the idea of podcasting and how that can be an effective text and an effective starting point for students to begin thinking about the communication process and what they're listening to shape their own opinions. But next, we're going to pass it off to Heather. She's going to introduce you to the elementary angle here in terms of communicating to or listening to understand all points of view.
Thanks, Aaron. So again, just one of many resources that you can find to help engage in that active listening. Some strategies I pulled from Edutopia. So one of the strategies is say it once and repeat. So the idea is that you let the students know up front that they're only going to hear the instructions once, and then you get them to repeat them back. Again, we always keep in mind the specific kids in our class and the DEI that might be necessary for some kids. Second strategy that you're probably familiar with is the idea of turn and talk. So one way to inspire active listening in your students is to give them a listening task. So you might say, I'm going to describe the process of, and get the students to listen, and then you pause and have them turn to a partner and repeat what you said back to them. So knowing that there's accountability coming, the students have to actively engage in listening. You can look at strategy 3, which is using hand signals. So you might let the students know that there's going to be nonverbal signals attached to the listening. So when I'm finished, you're going to share your opinion by holding up one finger for agreeing, 2 fingers for disagreeing, etc. Fourth strategy you see there is paying attention, pause, and paraphrase. So when students are in small groups, the idea is that we work on having them pay attention and listening. And the idea is that they pay attention without trying to form their response. So they're just simply listening for the step 1. Then we actually give a pause time where they get to have that time to form their response, so they're not pressured by the forming it. And then we get them to give their response to the group, and then the group has a chance to paraphrase their response back. And last but not least, the strategy number 5, creating questions. So whether they're listening to you as the teacher, or they're listening to a documentary or watching a clip or a speech or another student, is the idea is that they can record any questions or wonderings they have, or record an idea that they learned, so that they have a way to engage in that as well. So All of these are different strategies. There's many out there that you might find useful for the elementary classroom. Again, you'll see the shortened link here. I've added all of these links as well into cubeforteachers.com with the keyword communication. So if you're looking to follow these up later, you'll be able to find them there. And I'm going to pass it back to Aaron, and he's going to share some secondary examples.
Thanks very much, Heather. So the secondary example that I'm going to discuss and talk about is using podcasts as a starting point for students to listen to a variety of opinions, to listen to a variety of points of view, and then from there, give them some tasks to think about what it is that they've experienced, what they've listened to, some opportunities to work through it and see that there are some really interesting ideas and opinions out there in these audio texts, and figuring out what it is that they are actually listening to before they go ahead and turn it into their own communication piece. So I got this idea from the English curriculum. The overall expectation in terms of overall curriculum and communication is that I listen to understand, and as outlined in that curriculum, you can see that a large portion of the specifics focus on getting the students to take what it is that they're listening to and actually be able to communicate in a multitude of ways, that they understand the nuance of the language, that they understand the nuance of phrasing and the way that it is presented to them, that it'll actually shape and can impact their own positions and their own point of view and their own understanding. So for those that don't know, podcasting is just simply digital audio recording. You can gather podcasts online from iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, a variety of websites. cbc.ca has a large library of podcasts that cover a wide variety of topics. And in terms of their own content, some of these podcasts are scripted very much like a radio play. Some are just conversational, where it's a couple of people talking about their favorite movies that were just released. It could be a Q&A interview with prominent figures in the world. Sometimes it's performance-based, but the one thing that I really like about podcasts is that they're niche-based. So pretty much any student will find something that will appeal to them. Athletes are using podcasts as a means of communicating and connecting with their audience. Movie stars are using podcasts now. So it gives them a great opportunity to find something that they can really enjoy and feel connected to when they're listening to it. So with podcasting, it's a great resource for the students, because they can always go back and just re-listen to it over and over and over again as they're trying to build that capacity of understanding what they're listening to. And it can be uploaded onto any device, anything that will support MP3 playback. It's very empowering and very engaging. And moving into the first part of understanding multiple points of view, what is they can not only just listen, but they can narrow down their focus and just listen to the words that are being said. I know that some people could use videos very easily for trying to get students to understand what maybe somebody's trying to communicate, like a TED Talk, but I find that the audio works perfectly because it's just simple audio. There's no visual connection to it. The students are pretty much forced to just listen and to focus on the words that are being said. So the first part of getting them to understand multiple points of views, like what Heather said, is they have to develop active listening strategies and active listening skills. So students will have to create a certain set of parameters to understand that listening to a podcast, though, is very different than listening to somebody in just a conversation. Because with a regular conversation, you can ask questions to clarify what they're saying, but with a podcast, you have to just write down questions and maybe just pose questions to yourself as you're listening to make sure that you're getting it. And then even then, turn off the television, turn off YouTube, turn off all the other distractions around you so that you can focus on your task at hand. So next up is then just trying to get students to understand that they're listening to certain things. They're listening for certain cues, such as bias, buzzwords, keywords, and things like that in the podcast that will trigger certain emotions, certain connections back to a variety of like biases, so that then this way they can start to raise questions and effective understanding that maybe what they're listening to is having some sort of impact on their point of view. So once that they have covered that and have gone into detail with that and listened to the podcast a couple of times, I usually say listen to it once for fun and then listen to it again more closely, breaking it up into chunks to see if you can detect any bias. What are some of your own questions that you have about it, and try to start putting those ideas into a document or on paper so that you can go back and review as you re-listen again to see if you can maybe come to an answer or to an understanding again about what you're listening to. But one of the techniques that I find that works really well in getting students to understand what they're listening to is to kind of start a conversation with themselves. And I picked up this idea from another teacher that to get students to really think about what they're listening to and to see if they really understand what they've listened to is get the student to interview themselves. So based on the questions that they've maybe raised and gathered from listening to the podcast about a variety of issues, they create 10 interview questions that they write down and they try and answer. And again, like Andy brought up, you want to try and make sure that the questions are very open-ended and cover all kinds of ground that maybe can't necessarily be answered very easily, but take a lot of thought, take a lot of time, and focus on those key elements that really show that this is an in-depth, thoughtful question that it is bridging on their understanding of what they're listening to. And then from there, once they finally have that interview put together, they have the idea of that set in their mind, that they have reviewed and gone over those questions and gone over those responses to see if they understand maybe what this podcast is trying to communicate to them. They come back and now they can create a response to it. I often encourage students to do a podcast themselves. So if they've listened to a podcast of a couple people talking about a movie or something in popular culture that they maybe agree or disagree with, why not formulate a response based on what you heard in that podcast, create your own podcast to respond and communicate that back. But again, we want to be aware that maybe when the students are creating those texts, whether it's a podcast, a written assignment, if it's a video, a song, anything like that, that you want to make sure that it's going to support their understanding of that topic and that it's going to fit in with the tone, and it's going to also support the audience as well. So being a good digital citizen, again, you want to make sure that when you're taking all these points of view into consideration, you're being respectful of them, you're not putting them down, and you're presenting them in a way that the audience sees that you're actually treating it with some respect and with some dignity sometimes. But you can have a little bit of fun with it at the same time. So when it comes to understanding what they're listening to, the students do have to, in the end, be coaxed and be coached into it that this point of view and these opinions that they're forming based on what they're listening to are always going to be evolving, that they're very fluid, and that new points of view will always come up, and that they will change and keep going and start to develop more and more the more opinions and the more points of view that they hear. So they have to not only begin the thinking process one day and start thinking about what they're listening to and start understanding what those points of view and those positions are, but they have to keep doing it, and that it's an ongoing process of trial and error that they have to work through. And hopefully, with some practice and with a little bit of fun, they'll start to see that there are a wide variety of opinions out there that they can draw upon to enrich their lives.
Okay, so I'm Kelly McDougall, and I'm going to be talking a bit about self-advocacy. So that is voices opinions and advocates for ideas. Generally speaking, promoting self-advocacy refers to supporting students to develop self-awareness and self-esteem, to feel effective and in control of their lives, to promote their rights and advocate on their own behalf, to set goals and pursue them, to make choices and decisions, to solve problems, and to engage in self-reflection and an inner dialogue. When we teach our students to use the skills of self-advocacy, we empower them to be proactive, to take charge of their life at school, to persevere in the face of obstacles, and to develop a growth mindset. These skills can contribute to their interest in school and help them to view their schooling as an intrinsic part of who they are. Self-advocacy can help students learn by constructing solutions for challenges at school. To begin, a student will need to understand their strengths and areas of improvement, to know what they need to be successful, and to communicate those needs with other people. Self-awareness allows students to tune into their feelings through their actions and thoughts. We can help students to recognize their strengths and areas of weakness by fostering their ability to identify what is needed to complete a task, to recognize errors, and to make edits or changes. So you'll see in this slide, there's some additional resources in the red toolbox. A link to that has been provided at our hashtag and also in the YouTube chat. So some of the resources we're taking from LD at School and from Can Learn. So LD at School is the first resource of its kind that's dedicated to serving the needs of Ontario's educators. It provides educators with information, resources, and research related to teaching students with learning disabilities. So one strategy to create a voice for learners who may otherwise not participate in a face-to-face discussion would be to create a digital back channel through Today's Meet, Padlet, or another collaborative digital document that would allow students to pose questions or to contribute ideas or opinions during your lesson or discussion.
Okay, so we're coming back into some questions now, and we'll break it down with the team here. But looks like I have a question coming in from Bia that asks, when introducing technology, what does that mean for the competency? And I understand what you're saying. We've always been communicating. So why the technology now? What's the importance of it now? Well, we know that we are now globally connected through a digital world. And just in even our capacity, when we search for answers, we use various channels, social media channels, not just by the people next to us, but we reach out across the globe and see who has the answer for us. When we help our teachers and support our teachers, we no longer drive 45 minutes to go meet with them. We open up video channels with Skype and Google Hangouts. We communicate that way, just being more efficient. But how we communicate online is slightly different than we would be face-to-face. If it's even just using a telephone, as we know, is different than sitting face-to-face with somebody, because you don't have the social cues and the visual cues in front of you. So isn't our goal to help prepare our students for that modern world, so that as they move out to all these tools that are out there, they can communicate face-to-face? If they have to switch to a digital medium, no matter what it is, they can turn that on and away they go. I mean, I think we're doing our students a service by providing these technologies and also just showing them how to communicate effectively in the classroom. And we have one e-learning teacher through Brightspace D2 who told us recently, I know the student that's in my class. I know that I see her in the hallways, and she's a very quiet individual, very shy. She doesn't like to volunteer much during the classroom, put her hand up. But in the online world, she's leading the classroom discussions. And she says, I felt bad. I actually got out of the way because she's so professional. She has such a strong voice and she articulates herself so well, where she would shy away in the classroom. I would never have known, but to see her through the online platform, she now has a voice that she didn't have before. So even though the teacher doesn't say, well, therefore you never have to talk to her in class, that's a skill they'll work on. She at least gives that student a voice in that classroom to help elevate the learning in that class, empowering herself and the other students around her. So although we know teachers are busy, and we totally understand that, but what we look at is, are there tools out there that'll help our students to have that voice, to enhance those communication skills? And it's just taking that first step. Heather's going to take on another question I believe was asked by Tanya.
Oh, yeah, thanks. You answered partially the question that I had. Really, my question was in terms of teachers who are resistant to the use of technology, how is it that you might get them to buy in? The teachers that still feel like a very formal way of writing is appropriate for students. How would you support that?
Right. Okay, perfect. That's what I thought. This is Heather who will answer that question now.
Thanks. That's a great question. It's a question we often get asked, actually. One of the things that I encourage teachers to do is one, not to think that they need to abandon the written type of communication, because we still feel that there's a lot of value there, but to look at this as another avenue to incorporate. So often I will encourage teachers to pick a digital tool to focus on and try to use it in multiple different ways so that they get really comfortable with it. And if it's something that they're a little bit hesitant about at first, sometimes teaming up with another teacher to kind of troubleshoot and get through that tool. So often it's finding a tool that they have an entry point to and letting them work with it until they feel really comfortable before we introduce another tool to them. So that might help encourage that.
Great, thanks.
I think there was a question that came in from Jeff Cummings that asked about the concern with the privacy. Of course, that's something that we're always worried about. We don't just want to pick up any old tool and away we go. As educators and the students who are in our care and our safety, we want to make sure that the tools we use, we follow the correct terms and conditions with the age restrictions and other privacy and concerns. And we know through OSAPAC, through Ontario, if the Ontario teachers out there, there's a number of tools that we can use that are safer to use as a result, versus just grabbing a quick fix of a tool that's out there. But of course, we always want to protect our students and the well-being of them as they enter this digital world, especially if they are tapping into a global community. We're just looking through the chats here to see if there's other questions that arise from the team on the back channel. Is there any other things you'd like us to address with this topic?
We're skimming through, Andy.
Okay.
I think that we've captured most of them.
Fantastic.
There's been some great examples of tools presented in the YouTube chat. So I think that's been good. There was one question though. So Kelly in one of her slides had mentioned a link to some additional resources.
Okay.
And we didn't manage to get that posted, but we certainly will. We'll make sure that goes out on the Twitter with the Twitter hashtag.
Okay.
Actually, Patrick, it was posted in the chat. I posted it just before she got on.
Great. Thank you, Joe.
Oh, wonderful.
Okay, Patrick, over to you.
And so with that, thank you very much to everyone who participated tonight. We are going to invite you to join us next time. Our last and final session will be on June 1st, 2017 at 8 p.m. We will share the link via Twitter and in eCommunity as well. We'll be looking at the competencies in totality and trying to finalize and sort of come up with some final thoughts. Until then, we do hope you keep the conversation going using the Be a Game Changer hashtag and through our online Be a Game Changer environment listed there. Before we finalize everything and say goodnight for the entire evening, I do want to say thank you very much to the group that presented tonight, to Duffer and Peel. That would include Andy Quishin, Nuna DeCastro, Kelly McDougall. Andy, I'm going to look to you there were a couple of gentlemen there and I don't have their last names written, so I'm going to look to you to thank them.
Sure thing. On our end here, we have Sean McCabe, Aaron Middlemiss, Nuna DeCastro, Kelly McDougall, Heather Hickey, and myself, Andy Quichin, all from Duffer and Peel.
Apologies, everybody. Thank you very much to that team for tonight. As well, we want to thank Bea Meglio and Kathy Blacklock from the Ministry of Education, Jeff Cummings, Joe Russo as well for their support tonight, Sean Hamilton, Jen Apgar, Joanne Kenny, Shelley Lowry, Laura McKay, Tanya Williamson. We're all in the background collecting questions, supporting everybody, recognizing when things are not going quite as well as we wanted and trying to make corrections to make it a great evening and wonderful learning opportunity for all of you. So on behalf of all of the team and from myself, Patrick McQuaid, thank you very much for joining us this evening, and we will see you at our next session. Have a good night, everybody.